We're counting down the top 20 best Game of Thrones women's costumes coming up. Welcome back to Costume Co. If you're new to the channel, I do almost weekly videos, and I have a full range of videos analyzing the costumes of Game of Thrones. It took multiple polls on Twitter and YouTube and a thorough analysis, but with the assistance of aspiring costume designers Erin LaFay and Tatiana Melendez, we have curated the top 20 best Game of Thrones women's costumes from the HBO series of Game of Thrones. Let's get right to it. Warning, there are major spoilers for all 7 seasons of the HBO series Game of Thrones. Oysters, clams, and cockles. After being resigned to dressing like a boy for multiple seasons, toward the end of season 5, while disguised as Lana the oyster seller, Arya finally gets to wear something pretty. Of this drastic change, Erin says it is just so good to see her out of that dagnabbit boy's leather strap top. The change is nice, it's so rough and ragged, almost elegant in her character's sense. Here's costume designer Michelle Clapton's original sketch for Arya's costume taken from Entertainment Weekly. Clapton said that Arya's street vendor Barrow Girl costume is inspired a bit by Russian costumes with fabric made to look like filigreed copper. Here's a good shot of Arya's sunburst pleated skirt in season 6, and it's a common garment worn by both men and women in Bravos, most notably the bankers. And the skirt has 2 layers with a slightly frayed, unfinished hem, which Arya tops off with a macrame shawl. One of the most interesting aspects of Arya's costume is this doublet-like jacket. It's comprised of 2 layers, the base is a brocade, and the top layer looks like a macrame lace overlay. This is probably the girliest we've ever or will ever see Arya, Tatiana says. It provides a welcome reprieve from 3 seasons of that boy costume. The intricacy of the macrame and the pleating give it a rustic delicacy that effectively hides her inner strength and ruthlessness, which is appropriate given the reason she's wearing it. Power is power. In the season 2 debut, The North Remembers, Cersei literally wraps herself up in her family sigil. She's sort of like a walking billboard for their motto, "Hear me roar." With a silhouette in keeping with her softer hued gowns from season 1, this Japanese-inspired gold and crimson silk gown is accentuated with metallic embroidery on the cuffs and shoulders, and it's festooned with red embroidered rampant lions on the side panels. On the right is one of Clapton's early concept designs for Cersei. Cersei's gowns are often belted or girdled just shy of the hip, with an obi or Japanese belt which is based upon Lannister armor, and it's made of cast metal plate, rivets, and gold mail. Clapton says we see the small beginnings of her armoring with the metal belt. She so wishes that she had been born a man. Here's a close-up of principal embroidery artist Michelle Carragher's embroidery, her incorporating birds alighting, which is a common theme in Cersei's kimono wrap gowns. In the season 2 episode Blackwater, Cersei adds this elaborately engraved plate armor. This upping the ante was an intentional design decision by Clapton, her saying, "I wanted to increase her shell, I guess. Everything's more ornate, grander, until we finally see her in episode 209 in a sort of armored corset." Here's a close-up of the armor from the Making Game of Thrones website. The front and back panels of the breastplate are engraved with matching rampant lions. Tatiana says this dress represents one of Cersei's lowest points. The flowing kimono, along with her messy braid, give her an unkempt demeanor, not achieved with her hair down. The armored bodice looks like a pathetic attempt at control and flimsy protection amongst the disheveled honesty of her appearance. And disheveled honesty is right, since in her drunkenness she is her most honest self and vulnerable with Sansa, giving her almost maternal advice on how to survive the life Sansa has thrust upon her. The Queen's Hand. In the season 6 episode Battle of the Bastards, Dany wears this charcoal gray Grecian-style gown when she greets Yara and Theon in the throne room. So Tatiana says, Considering that this is the last dress we see Dany in before she sets sail for Westeros, it really tells a story despite how deceptively simple it looks. The last time we saw her in Grecian clothing was in Drogo's funeral pyre at the end of season 1. The fact that they bring the style back for the end of her Slavers Bay storyline and incorporate her other elements such as her pants and boots from the Dothraki and the belt from Karth tell the story of her evolution in power and self-worth. Now when she wears Grecian clothing, she's no longer an innocent, naive princess being used for other people's agendas. She is a powerful queen and conqueror, regal in her beauty and deadly in her determination to claim her throne. It's likely that Clapton took Grecian inspiration from these two French couturiers famous for their draping techniques. In fact, Clapton altered one of the House of Viennese gowns back in season 3. Aaron sees it as a kind of power gown, saying because of how simple it is, it almost gives it more power. It gives me a feeling of how a storm cloud rolls in, silent at first with a cool breeze, then rolling thunder and lightning. Up to this point, Dany's marine attire has been made of a palette of whites and blues, but now she is wearing gray. It's like her heart has already left and she is on her way back to Dragonstone. Grandmother Willow. Tatiana says of the Tyrell family matriarch's extravagant ensemble that she wears to Sansa and Tyrion's wedding, "I absolutely love the brocade and style of her coat. It gives her such an air of elegance and power befitting her wisdom and status. Plus, I love that she matches with her grandchildren, symbolizing how united they were. Indeed, her and Marjorie's dress make it seem like Marjorie was going to grow up to be her grandmother in the future." The gown is made from this sumptuous cotton and silk brocatelle from Rubelli. Aaron says this gown is right and graceful for a woman of Olenna's age. It's not too sharp or too dull, just like her personality and her namesake, the Queen of Thorns. The Long Farewell. Ellaria wears a diaphanous silk organza gown in pewter in season 5 when she gives Marcella Baratheon a deadly kiss goodbye. Viewers Larissa J. and Leslie Gallen chose Ellaria's murder dress as their favorite. Ellaria is dressed ironically in this feminine, sheer, and airy gown, while at the same time secretly plotting to take vengeance on the Lannisters and overthrow Dorne's reigning monarchy. The crisp organza sits in direct contrast to the Indian brocade halter top worn underneath. Clapton says of the gowns, worn by both Ellaria and the Sand Snakes in the Dorne scenes, "The dresses were beautifully embroidered by my embroiderer Michelle Carragher as usual, but I wanted it to look like one little pull of a strap and it would just drop to the ground. There was nothing to them, just clouds." Here's a close-up of Carragher's elaborate ribbon embroidery, applique, and beading. Clapton hasn't said, but it's likely that the floral motifs are inspired by local Dornish flowers. Sisters Thorns. In the season 3 episode, The Bear and the Maiden Fair, Marjorie looks absolutely stunning in this Wedgwood blue gown featuring a gold metallic lace haltered bodice. In keeping with the blue and gold hues of the entire Tyrell family, she wears this dress to Sansa and Tyrion's wedding. We know how much Cersei hates Marjorie's lack of skin coverage, so it's just a double dig by Marjorie to wear such a deeply plunging neckline and other bared bits to a Lannister event. Hair designer Kevin Alexander told Fashionista, "What we did with Marjorie that we hadn't done with anyone else is we followed the line of the costume. I wanted a lot more to be showing. I wanted a lot more flesh on her. We wanted there to be a little more sexiness." The dress is cut just like her light blue halter dress from season 3. This one features an A-line skirt made from paper silk, possibly hand-dyed, and a halter top with this ornate metallic lace overlay and floating velvet shoulder cuffs that are swing-tacked to the halter. Here's a close-up detail of Marjorie's rose jewelry pictured on the bottom that she attaches to her season 2 and 3 dresses with ribbons. The piece was commissioned by Steenson's Jewelers in Ireland. The Conqueror's Dress. More than any other look, Dani's blue Jacquard's dress along with the matching blue cape is unmistakably her, an outfit she wears when she wants to get something done. YouTube viewer Ellie says, "It's just so elegant," while Quinn Interrupted says, "I think it is one of the most iconic pieces she has ever worn. It is very recognizable and I love what it symbolizes, which is the growth and maturity in Dani's personality, as well as her becoming more in tune to her Targaryen heritage and sense of style." Hashtag Sweetener says, "I just love it. Beautifully feminine, exudes power whilst also practical for a warrior queen. Character-wise, it's not too flowy like Marine, but not as rigid as Dragonstone. The perfect balance." Here is Michelle Clapton's rendering of Dani's Season 3 costume. Of it, she says, "The change in her clothing style is partly about her journey of becoming a woman and a leader, but also the practicality of it." The dress is based on the Karth shape. It's the only other shape of dress she has seen, so she has interpreted into her individual look. Clapton explains, "For the first time, she's her own person, so she begins to develop her own style with some reference to what we've seen before. She has control of herself and control of her look. It's very different, quite a strong look with some references to dragons in the texture." Carragher stated that Michelle Clapton wanted a dragon scale-like texture embroidery that starts to emerge on 3 of Daenerys' costumes, which become heavier and more pronounced, growing and evolving as the season progresses. Carragher explains further, the decoration on her costume develops from a subtle texture, and as she increases in power and strength, this texture becomes more defined to map out her journey in the story. As Dani grows in strength with her dragons, the texture becomes more embellished and grows down the costume. The Angel's Nightmare. For her second wedding in Winterfell, and her marriage to Ramsay Bolton, Sansa embraces both the Stark and Tully traditions in this winter white wedding coat. The textured dove gray silk undergown has the signature metal drawstring high collar and softly drawn-in cuffs, and the fur capelet plays tribute to her Stark legacy. Viewer Lost Imagination states, "It represents the Lady of Winterfell in white perfectly, the truss lacing of the coat and the perfect fit of the body, in tandem with the perfect color for a moonlit snow wedding, was breathtaking." Viewers Dow Jones loves both of Sansa's wedding dresses, and Lindsay Louise Sith says, "Her wedding dress to Ramsay was so pretty." The bell shape is also supposed to somewhat resemble the Lyanna Stark crypt statue. Sansa's gowns is made from the stunning rope motif brocade from Chase Irwin's Halcyon collection. Sansa even found in the castle some of the clasps that her mother used on her dresses, which are shaped like the Tully fish sigil. Coward's Farewell. In the Season 4 episode The Mountain and the Viper, Dani wears this impressive silk gown in blue and silver. In a way, it's an extension of her less former Conqueror dress. Aaron says this gown is a little showy, but in all the right ways. Every time I see her on screen with this dress on, it grabs my attention and holds it, just like how a true queen should. Not aggressive like Cersei's, it's almost warm and inviting, but be warned, it can turn to fire. Clapton explains how Dani carefully selects her wardrobe depending on her audience, saying, "So she's very formal when she's in the main hall. She's developing a wardrobe and a taste now. We're still keeping it to the blues and silvers, but there's more dragony skin-inspired embroidery. I think it's nice. It gives such a different look to her." Along with the dragon scale and beading nearly covering the entire bodice, the rest of the silk gown is covered with a mermaid mesh overlay, creating the appearance of scales. The gown has an arched opening revealing this soft sunray pleated underskirt. Here are some close-ups of the embroidery taken from Carragher's website. Tatiana says, "Michelle Carragher never ceases to amaze me with her embroidery technique, and this dress is one of my favorite instances of it. The sheer intricacy all over the dress is exquisite, and if I'm not mistaken, this is one of the first dresses she wears after conquering Meereen, and it's an excellent show of power for early in her reign." Raven's Needle. In the season 4 episode, The Mountain and the Viper, Sansa appears in a new costume. Tatiana explains its significance, saying, "This dress is the beginning of Sansa's true change and maturity, despite the challenges still ahead of her. What I like about this dress is how resourceful Sansa can be." As Michelle Clapton said, she picked up raven feathers from all over the castle to incorporate it into her dress. Tatiana also says, despite it being a fashion all her own, it's nice how it still has stark elements, such as the mini needle on her necklace and the strong shoulders. It's more of a transition dress, her slowly returning to her familiar roots after the garish horror of King's Landing. Here is Clapton's original concept art for Dark Sansa. As Clapton explained, in keeping with the concept that Sansa had to plausibly assemble this dress from available materials, Sansa is supposed to have gathered messenger raven feathers from the castle's rookery. In an interview, Clapton explains the symbolism behind Sansa's choice of jewelry, saying, "The necklace was based on the idea that Arya had needle. At the end of the necklace there's a point, a spike, which is like Sansa's smaller version of needle. It's a jewelry idea of needle. She's finally taking them on." Actor Sophie Turner says of her character's hair color transition, "I've always liked when Sansa's hair was dyed black and pulled back in very tight, taut French braids. It was her own look and something that she'd created." The Queen's audience. In the Season 5 debut, The Wars to Come, Daenerys meets with former slave trader Hizdahr zo Loraq, while dressed in a soft white floor-length gown and for the first time eradicating all blue from her wardrobe palette. The feedback from viewers was incredible on Dany's Egyptian-inspired dress. Nicole Ruche adores this costume, saying it makes her shine like a star among the warm colors of Marine, which, considering her status as the shining light of salvation to the slaves, I say it's a perfect dress for her. While Ross adds, "Love that the color is meant to show her in a pure light to the people of Marine." Clapton says of this style of dress, "It's almost like it's revealing, but at the last minute it's not. It's held together. She wants to be attractive and appealing, but at the same time she wants to be in control." Viewer Aurora Santoriella says, "I love the contrast of the smooth, structured overskirt and the soft flowing vertical stripes of the underskirt." The texture of the bodice and sleeves is achieved with a fancy pleat called flat chevron pleating, while the underskirt, like we see in her blue gown, is sunray pleated by cement pleating in London. Power is waning. Wearing one of her beautiful gowns embellished with bits of armor is Cersei, pictured with Littlefinger in the Season 3 episode Kissed by Fire. The armor shows Cersei's increasing paranoia, with Clapton saying, "Cersei is forced to wear ever more elaborately embroidered, armored dresses in an attempt to show her strength and her rightful place." Here is Clapton's initial concept art for this costume. And we'll see in this illustration that Clapton had added bronze scales to the shoulders. This is a reference to Sir Jaime's Kingsguard uniform. And the other element that didn't make it into the final costume are these metal panniers, which will later be repurposed for Sansa's wedding gown to Tyrion. Tatiana says, "I personally prefer the armor with this red brocade dress than the purple and gold dress Cersei wears to the dinner with Marjorie. There it looks like overkill, like she's trying too hard, which granted might have been the point, but in contrast, the subtlety of the red brocade makes the armor a beautiful centerpiece, looking more secure in her power and elegant without detracting from her power." Unlike Cersei's softer kimono-style dress, these off-the-shoulder gowns are more rigid and severe, and the colors of the crimson brocade with gold silk lining, taken directly from her family sigil, are tied directly to her Lannister loyalties. The Mother of Shadows. Melisandre's full-length maroon red traveling cloak, as seen here in the Season 3 episode Second Sons, is one of her staple garments that carry her through 5 seasons, and it's worn over top of a variety of gowns. It's such an unusual piece, and it's uniquely Melisandre. Erin says, "This cloak puts all others to shame on the show. The beauty of the fabric with the pleating, and if I go on I will faint with reasons as to why this is the best of them all, and the simple cut and wrapping of the fabric is what makes it so much more powerful than any of the other cloaks." And he adds, "I plan to make my own version of it someday soon." The two-piece cloak is a type of circle cape with a center front opening and two large slash openings for her arms. And all of the shaping comes from the seaming of this alternating flat pleated and pin tucked taffeta fabric. Here's the robe as seen from two exhibits, and you can really see the amount of breakdown on the costume, especially along the hem. Meanwhile, the wrap seen here in the climb, it's actually a multifunctional garment. Melisandre uses it to cover her hair or as a wrap collar to top her cloak. And the puckered silk or wool blend fabric appears to be a matelassé, which is French for quilted. In this shot, you see the brown underside of the wrap, which I think is just the reverse side of the heavyweight fabric. Eat your heart out, Cersei. In the Season 3 episode The Bear and the Maiden Fair, Marjorie dons this two-section gown with plenty of exposed skin. In stark contrast to Sansa's gown, the top portion features a seafoam blue and gold brocade bodice with plunging center front and short cap sleeves. And the full paper silk circle skirt and bodice are trimmed with silk velvet ribbon, and the sections are joined at the center front with a bronze metal rose and metal rose vines. Marjorie wields her power in a different way than Cersei, Clapton stating she merely has to reveal more youthful flesh in a series of not-so-accidentally revealing dresses. Marjorie's in great competition with Cersei, which plays out in Season 3. It's almost like a fashion fight between them, which is quite funny. Marjorie undermines her with the girlish, revealing simplicity of her new dresses. It's a dangerous game. Tatiana says, placing this dress next to Cersei's armored dress was a stroke of genius. The style makes her seem like a fairy tale princess out of the Arabian Nights, almost like something out of Joffrey's less disturbing fantasies. She looks so graceful and lovely, yet strong among chiffon and cap sleeves. Tatiana goes on to say where Cersei needs metal to protect herself, Marjorie only needs her beauty and sex appeal. This dress is a painful reminder to Cersei that her own youth and beauty, what she used as weapons, are waning with age, exacerbating future problems. The Golden Snake Goddess. Alaria's striking purple wedding attire was enough to make Tywin's jaw just drop, which was no easy feat. Despite some viewers' hostility toward the Sand Snake's costumes, viewer Dow Jones adores anything Ellaria Sand wore, saying, "There's no denying that this is bold and memorable. You know when you look at her that she's not from King's Landing." Of Elaria's costume for Joffrey's wedding, Clapton said, "I like the strength of her outfit being able to lift the cape away to this very simple, sensual elegance, cut to the navel without revealing too much. It's a very assertive piece both in movement and in color. I love to think of what Cersei's reacting to when she sees it. After all, her daughter is now in Dorne." Clapton said, "Ellaria Sand's style is very different from anything we've previously seen, and so it's quite revealing, and it's actually sand-washed silk, so it has a lovely flow. It's almost like a weightiness to it." Like Daenerys, Ellaria has these exaggerated scale-like collar shoulder pieces, most likely inspired by the Viper, although these ones here are crafted from Indian brocade. Clapton often uses animals as inspiration for many of her designs, aligning the characters' costumes with animals from their house sigil. Of this Cleopatra-inspired headpiece, Clapton said, "Ellaria has a really lovely sort of chained headpiece, which I just thought, my God, it's such a great look. It's this thing of trying to find new areas of how people should look because we've obviously done so much now." And this brocade shoulder piece is interchangeable with the stamped leather one. The close-up shot on the right is the work of Carragher. She said, "I enhanced the fabric's pattern with layers of copper jump rings, turquoise, and glass beads." Queen's Homecoming. In this monumental scene in the closing act of Season 6, Dany dresses in this regal, dark gray gown for her return voyage to Dragonstone. Like her other Myronese gowns, a style that is fashioned after the Indian kurti, Dany's dress is split with a deep V and anchored together with this pewter crossbar. The built-in cape sleeves wrap around and tie in the back, leaving an exposed back. But of course, the most remarkable feature is the beaded dragon detail on the upper sleeves. Here's a close-up look at the costume taken from Carragher's website. This spiky copper sequin on silk chiffon from Top Fabrica Soho is what gave the dragon embroidery its unique texture. For the arrival in Dragonstone in Season 7, Clapton's team modified the costume. So they added this Japanese-style collar and sleeves. Pretty clever because it appears to be an entirely new costume. Tatiana says, to my amazement, I learned that these two looks were one and the same, and for that I love it even more. But I lean more to the Dragonstone look from the dark grays and soft hints of red, from the beautiful texture of the fabric to the embroidery and the crystals used. This is one true outfit for a queen's entrance into her old home and for the world she intends to fix. The silhouette, Clapton explains, purposely echoes that of the Targaryen style that her brother wore in Season 1. Clapton told Harper's Bazaar, with Dany, the colors have gotten darker, but there is red creeping in, her house color. Slowly we're trying to move them into their own individual looks. It's practical, it's war. The time isn't for pretty dresses. Jewelry isn't worn to be attractive, it's worn to represent your house or your stature or your intent. This is the direction I have to go in now. Clapton adds, I wanted this season to close down color-wise, except that Dany, now she's just getting a little bit of red coming into her costume. She's finally claimed her throne. Well, she's on her way to claiming her throne. Now, if you look closely at the details, you can see that Carragher has layered gray and red feather stitch embroidery on the gown and collar and incorporated red Swarovski crystal beads to catch the light. Innocence Lost. In the Season 5 episode, Sons of the Harpy, Melisandre wears this magnificent Japanese-inspired gown offset by a sea of gray and white. It's by far, in my humble opinion, Melisandre's best gown. The shoulders appear to be even higher and extended, giving her the appearance of strength and control. Aaron says, this is a dress that is purely exotic and almost otherworldly. In a sense, this dress represents a wound that's cracking the foundation of Mel's belief system. Her faith is her armor, and it's crumbling apart. The sumptuous silk gown is a purple-bluish color, although it's difficult as usual to tell from the lighting, and has this moire pattern wood grain effect. The red streaks look like claw marks or cracks or fire. Tatiana says, I love how the fabric looks like lava cooling over or blood running down a burned husk, which some might argue is both disturbing and appropriate. Melisandre sacrificing Shireen feels less like an act of faith and more of a desperate attempt to maintain her flagging faith and her hold on Stannis. And while the shaping is similar to her other gowns, the elongated and squared off sleeves look very Japanese. This is typical of a Japanese furisode, where the sleeves are so long that they drag on the ground. The Lion's Prize. Many of Game of Thrones costumes are attached in some way to moments of sorrow, but that doesn't take away from their beauty, such as Sansa's gown worn in her marriage to Tyrion in Season 3. Clapton says, this is poor Sansa's wedding dress. The embroidered girdle depicts her life so far, with a final Lannister lion stamped at the base. I chose to use these slightly muted colors as it is a mournful occasion. Here is the gown fabric chosen by Clapton's team. The cotton and silk damask from Pure Frey features a taupey golden motif on a soft gray ground. Aaron says, while full of beauty, this is a gown that is leaking out of the seams with pain. Like the name that was given to it, it's almost like the Lannisters are branding her with this dress and marriage. However, as most of us know, this wedding and gown is nowhere near as painful and tragic as her final wedding. Carragher said that we imagined that the wedding dress has been commissioned by Cersei and the Lannisters for Sansa, so the embroidery would have come from Cersei's mind. We guessed that it wouldn't be romantic or lovely and girly and pretty with dainty flowers, but a real strong message of dominance, saying that we own you now, Sansa. White Flame. Love it or hate it, Game of Thrones really needed a showstopper in Season 7, and I'd have to say, hands down, it was Dany's white fur coat. Viewer Emma Peel says, that white winter coat is absolutely everything, that Targaryen winter wardrobe. And Jen the Muse says, I am partial to the fur set Dany wears north of the Wall. Here's Clapton's designs featuring the Targaryen-style collar. Clapton said, it's such a strong look riding the dragon through the snow. I can't think of another time she's gone to the aid of someone who is also, to some extent, a rival. It had to be a real statement piece. It looks very warrior queen. She's a vision when Jon looks up and sees her arriving. Clapton tells the Huffington Post, I took reference from the wildlings' attire. I wanted to define Dany's shape by cutting into and shaping the fur. Also, I was keen to create a warrior look, a thing of beauty. And viewer Bella McTavish says, I'm literally obsessed with the spinal effect on her coat. Clapton told the Inquirer, the coat is made of fake leather strips, 2 kinds of fake fur, a long pile high-quality fake fur and a short pile white fake fur, and some white rabbit fur at the hem. It is basted onto a corset to create the structured shape. Clapton says that the whole process took 2 to 3 months to sample and decide the direction, best materials, and construction. And we know that many of you will be disappointed that your favorites didn't make the list, so before we move on to number 1, here are some Game of Thrones honorable mentions. Catelyn Stark, Mournful Homecoming. Lysa Arryn, Death Dress. Daenerys Targaryen, The Lessons Begin. Sansa Stark, Honor Regained. Marjorie Tyrell, Stormland. Melisandre of Ashai, The Flame of the Faithful. Cersei Lannister, Mad Dog. Invasion of the Roses. In the Season 4 episode The Lion and the Rose, Marjorie marries Joffrey in this unique silk and linen royal wedding dress covered with creeping briar roses, thorns and all. The purple wedding had some of the most luscious frocks and togs out of all 7 seasons, but Marjorie's gown was certainly the icing on the wedding cake. Viewer Lena Luna says, Marjorie's wedding gown is by far one of my favorite costumes in the entire show. Here's Clapton's costume rendering. Of her idea behind the gown, Clapton said, I wanted it to be sort of quite traditional dress in a funny way. But then again, roses can be so pretty, and I didn't want her to be pretty. I wanted her to be slightly dangerous, hence the metal roses running along her dress, which subtly are spiked with metal thorns if you look closely, showing her danger underneath. Carragher elaborates on the point, saying, Marjorie's wedding dress has a simple, seductive shape, but the tangled, thorny stems are there as a web-like trap to capture and snare their prey, and the roses cascade and spill down, covering the ground, slowly spreading their influence in their wake. Of the final outcome, Clapton says, I'm pretty pleased with Marjorie's dress. It took weeks, months even, with all the roses and embroidery, and the bias cut was hard to achieve with the cutaway elements that are essential for her style. I wanted it to be pretty, but on closer inspection, strong, and to tell the story of her ambition. The crowns particularly tell this. Her wedding gown is made from this lovely linen and cotton voile, a French term for veil, by manufacturer Sacco in the color pearl. And dyed black, this is the same fabric used for Dark Sansa. According to Carragher, the gown took approximately 6 weeks to cut and construct, while each fabric rose was hand-rolled and stitched. And viewer Sarah says, I love the rose train on Marjorie's dress. Carragher says the roses were made from the same fabric as the dress. Strips of fabric were cut on the bias and folded, then rolled into shape, and each given a stem of silver mesh wire. The briars flow from the front bodice around the waist and flow down the center back into a cascade of roses spilling onto the train of the dress. The leaves were also cut from fine leather, painted silver in various sizes, and then stitched onto the stems of the dress with additional velvet embroidered sprigs and wired leaves. And you can learn more about this costume, including how the design team created the royal crowns and jewelry, by clicking on the card in the right corner. Let me know your favorite women's Game of Thrones costume in the comments below. And coming soon, we'll count down the top 20 best Game of Thrones men's costumes. But in the meantime, you can watch my top 10 worst Game of Thrones costumes. A special thanks to Tatiana and Aaron for helping me put together this video, and also to Patrick Lemieux for letting me use his stunning costume illustrations.